Hi folks, this is Andy here, speaking to you from Simon Fraser University. Hope all is going well with you. In today's lecture, I want to share the basic idea behind the circular economy. I think it is a fundamental follow-on perspective from climate change, whereas climate change focuses on energy and the need for having clean energy. Circular economy takes an even more thorough approach to rethinking our supply chains and production systems. So when we talk about the circular economy, we have to think about the metaphor of spaceship Earth. The Earth is a unique planet, as far as we know, that allows for life to thrive, including human beings. Yet humans seem to be at times challenged to understand how much our well-being depends on clean air, clean water, soil, other animals, other plants. All of those things need to thrive for humans to thrive. And so in a sense, instead of thinking about the earth as something to use as we will, we have to think about taking care of the earth so that it will continue to be able to give to us. In fact, beyond climate change, we have a number of crises happening on Earth. These include the collapse of ecosystems throughout many parts of the world, loss of biodiversity with species going extinct on a regular basis, the scourge of microplastics, where they break down into smaller and smaller pieces, are transmitted across oceans and end up in humans, affecting our health potentially in very negative ways over the long run. Ocean acidification coming directly from climate change, leading to the collapse of ocean ecosystems and releasing large amounts of methane that will accelerate climate change. And we also have to think not just about ecological systems, but human systems. The fact is that a lot of the things that we purchase and consume on a regular basis are made according to unsafe labor standards. It's always been a struggle to try to think about ways to get countries in the South to accept global standards. They see labor and environmental standards as domestic issues, when in fact we are now in an era where all supply chains are global in nature. What we lack is a global system of regulation around that labor, around that production, so that we can make sure that things are produced in a sustainable way. In fact, externalities costs or costs of pollution are not considered in our current market systems. The price only reflects the immediate cost of production, not the cost of disposal. But creating a global system is not that easy. We have the tragedy of the commons, where it is difficult to assign responsibility for common air, common water, such as the oceans. And in fact, even in the latest, most ambitious climate change agreement, the Paris Agreement, everything was done on the basis of voluntary standards. So these are some of the issues that a shifting to a circular economy faces. The basic idea is to move from a linear system of production, where we just produce the things we want and then we throw them into landfill without thinking about them, to moving to a circular system where we can use and reuse the materials over and over again, reducing the environmental footprint of our actions. Of course, this requires a huge new shift in mentality. For example, with fast fashion or with electronics, we tend to continually buy the latest version so that we can stay on top of things and maintain social status. Those are things that would need to change if we wanted to move to a circular economy. In fact, we would think less about recycling in a circular economy and more about reuse, remanufacturing, and refurbishing. So this requires a completely different kind of production process and a different mentality on the top part of both the producing company and the consumer. It's a complete shift then in our supply chains that's being called for. I just want to give you a few examples from my own life experience. I was working for UNCTAD and the UK government on the Sustainable Manufacturing and Environmental Pollution Program, in order to synthesize some of the lessons that they created around circular economy experiments in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. The idea in these projects was to reduce the amount of energy pollution and manufacturing pollution, including plastics. So it really looked at ways that we could, for example, think about shifting out of lead acid batteries to lithium ion batteries that might last longer, thinking about ways to reduce environmental pollution around leather and textiles, where the conditions for production are extremely hazardous in the global south, and thinking about the accumulating piles of plastic waste that are occurring around the global south. The biggest challenge we found was finding a sustainable business model to where refurbishing, remanufacturing, and reuse could become financially viable. In many cases, it requires some government intervention because the costs of, for example, virgin plastic are much cheaper than refurbished plastic. And so the experiment was extremely bold. It had some successes, and it also provided an incredible learning curve for how to move from, and the challenges for moving from a linear to a circular model. Some of the things that came out of that study were to think more carefully about the situations where it's a win-win between the producer and the environment. This would include things like shifting to energy efficiency or cleaner energy. It would include things like water and air pollution controls, worker safety. These are all things that would help producers in the long run. Producers do not certainly benefit when they have sick workers or unreliable workers or consumers. The challenge of upcycling or converting used materials into new materials is extreme in terms of finding a business case for it. In some ways, it's easier to use basic filtering or co-location in terms of reducing the environmental footprint of the production process itself. And so what we found was it's important to think about the entire production process to reduce waste, to reduce material use, to reduce plastic use. But every supply chain is unique and has its own challenges. In fact, beyond just the business model challenges are lacks of capacity in terms of managerial challenges, lack of capacity in terms of regulatory challenges, the challenge of developing secondary markets for reused materials. Consumers tend to want new materials. So there are a large array of issues that the circular economy transition faces, but maybe the time is now, as we see environmental conditions deteriorating and climate change, it's bringing the environment to the fore for us to rethink how we make and consume things. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to further discussion.